Yeah. What's the deal with black people's Achilles tendons? Isn't there some type of like ligamentous shifts with uh, people of African descent compared to Caucasian descent? Have you heard that?
I don't know anything specific about
I
that. I
thought
mean,
there was something.
what I do know is that the black athlete will tend to have flatter feet. They'll tend to have a higher, smaller calf muscle, so they have a longer Achilles tendon, and the feet tend to be flat, which is advantageous for speed because
Why is that advantageous for speed?
when you hit the ground, there's less yield and deformation the flatter it is. So it turns into almost like a paddle that hits. Whereas, the high arch, when it hits, it has to take the time to do that and to do that.
Hmm.
Whereas if it's already flat, I just go boom, boom.
Something that I wanted to go through as far as some type of structure for the conversation, and then we can go out into whichever direction feels appropriate, is the body moves in spirals. A lot of the two-dimensional textbook definitions that we try to apply to human kinesiology, it ends up translating to a lot of you know monoplanar movement, breaking down sagittal plane, frontal plane, transverse plane, and we try to kind of superimpose this almost like robotic 2D textbook portrayal of human kinesiology into actual living, breathing, animated movement, and it doesn't always pair that well. When you start getting into more spiral mechanics and Serge Krakowetsky stuff, spinal engine, things of the sort, we can break down what that is. Suddenly you see a lot of cyclone type movement through the body, which is multi-planarness, being more than one plane. It's just a part of it. It'd be very hard to wrangle the planes because they're kind of always going through this almost like cyclone type motion. Could we, and please correct any of that if any of it feels like it needs correction, but could we go through and start from the foot up
Yeah,
and
sure.
break down some of these spiral mechanics and like
Sure thing.
what that looks like?
Absolutely.
Thanks. How do we start with the foot?
Okay, let's start with the foot. Let's start with the foot as it relates to locomotion.
Yeah,
Sound good?
please.
Okay. So basically, we're going to look at the structure of the foot first, because structure dictates function, and function over time transforms structure. So function will transform the structure. So if you limp forever, you're going to get stuck in the limp. And the structural reality is going to determine the function today in terms of what is biomechanically optimal for that given structure. So if we're going to look at the foot and we're going to look at locomotion, then we want to know the anatomical structural reality that we're playing with. And the foot, you can think of it as two levels. The first floor is the outside foot, fourth and fifth toe, the fourth and fifth metatarsals, and they will route into the calcaneus. And that is your first floor. So the outside is the strong side. It happens to have smaller bones, but those bones correspond to the substantial heel and that lateral stability where you have the big IT band and you just have a lot more spring and structure on the outside. The inside or second floor is the big toe, second toe, third toe, and they will route up to the talus. So you have a first story that is strong, and you have a second story that we say is long. And so your general rule of thumb is that in the locomotive pattern, you basically want to go from outside to inside. So the foot will initiate. If you're walking, it's going to initiate through the heel, go outside, and then pronate to the inside and get the projection off the big toe. And that corresponds with a figure eight at the hip joint. So, and that's generally speaking, that is the cleanest, most efficient way to move your body on the ground, in a bipedal locomotive pattern.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And then also something that is happening as well as we call it the screw home mechanism, and that internal external rotation of the tibia in relation to the femur or the knee
Yes. Yes.
happening there.
Yes.
So there's also, from my understanding, the calcaneal tendon kind of has a spiraling into the calcaneus itself. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and then you have the windlass mechanism
The
where
windlass neck. Yeah.
the extension will sort of fortify the arch.
Yeah.
And as we were speaking prior to hitting go, the the flat-footed athlete will oftentimes have an advantage over the high arch athlete because there's less deformation of the structure when it is hitting the ground. So the high arch, there will be a greater amount of yield, and that takes more time. And the flatter foot just sort of paddles off the ground. And so
Mhm.
what I like to do is I like to understand performance and then just function. And I want to understand the nexus point and then the divide of health and performance. So they track to sort of a nexus point where you'll have the optimal health and the optimal performance at that level. But if you want to go beyond that level of performance, oftentimes there will be a consequence to the health. So if we look at uh, you know a triathlete, it might not be the healthiest thing in the world to expose yourself to that stress over that much time. If we look at take like professional bodybuilding, the only way you can be in the game is to take a lot of drugs, and that enhances the performance at the expense, to some extent, of health. And I think by laying it out just extremely honestly, without the preconceived notions, and the reason I thought of this is most people, the knee jerk reaction is flat feet are bad, a high arch is good. Okay, depends what you want to do with it. Right? Um, and I, sorry about that. I'm going to kill my calendar.
Oh,
Um,
no worries.
so, what I like to do is I like to dispel myths that are perpetuated by people who have not thought it through. So they're more willing to just take what they were taught, repeat it, and never scrutinize it to the extent that I believe is, we have the opportunity to scrutinize, and then we're more accurate in our understanding and then our prescriptive actions.
Yeah. I wonder what, well, I want to keep on going through the spiral mechanics up through the
Yes.
body
Yeah.
and,
I
and,
won't.
and
I
find our
won't.
ways.
I won't
Yeah.
tangentially.
But, but no, I mean, I love all of this. This is freaking perfect. And something that I want to come back to that, bookmark that. But I wonder from your perspective, uh, what stands out to you that's missing in, traditional kinesiology education of today,
um.
or education around human movement from like a
Yeah.
traditional physical therapist perspective? If you're going to
Right.
school and
Yeah.
learning multi-planar movement and
Yeah.
the various different planes of motion, do you feel like that's the this kind of rotational spiral type mechanic stuff? Do you think that that is being conveyed within traditional physical therapy?
What I would say is that there are deficiencies in what a lot of the, you know, conventional today's practices are, and I would say that there's several deficiencies. One of which, just to sort of go a little bit far, is understanding the energetics of movement. So, like, what is energetics of movement, right? It's contingent upon the cleanest delivery and then the strongest, cleanest, most efficient recovery or feedback, the action reaction. And a lot of people break down three planes of motion and like to categorize according to those three planes of motion. And I think the failure there is that we're always in three planes. So, regardless of what you're targeting, you exist in three planes. The DNA is spiral, the actin and myosin filaments are spiral, the origin insertions are spiral. The whole thing is spiral.
The connective tissue, the heart
Right,
spirals.
exactly. And there's something interesting about a spiral that A spiral. So if I look at the power equation, power equals the force divided by the time multiplied by the distance. When you harness a spiraling action, you are creating more distance in the same or less amount of time. So if you think of like, oh, I'm going straight, well, you took the straight line path internally, which is not as long as it can be if you rifle and spiral. So not only do you move faster, you move longer internally. And I think it's very important to understand the distinction between range of motion and range of rotation. Range of motion is an external targeted goal or measurement, and the range of rotation is the internal measurement of what your body's doing inside to take the maximum amount of slack out of the system. So the more slack I have in the system, the less power, the less instantaneous go, and the greater chance of injury, lower performance, not as much joy. It's not as beautiful. So there's a whole host of things with this Western mechanistic linear way of thinking where, okay, this joint does this, and therefore, okay, you're looking at sort of the bark on the tree where you could step back and sort of see the whole picture
Yeah. And
when
then
you understand it in a holistic manner.
the analogy that you can do with that, if you want to take the slack out of a joint, making it a safer, more stable, stronger joint, is you just put your hand in your shirt here and
Yes,
then wrap it around, wrap your other hand around there. And how do you, so there's a little extra slack you can see there. To take that out, I would just twist that.
yes,
And that's what you're doing in like the with the femur joint. That's what you're doing in the shoulder, with the glenohumeral fossa. That's what you're doing through all the little like micro joint spaces throughout the body. It's this back and forth of opening, closing, internal, external rotation, but it's in a multiplanar way. It's
yeah.
typically like
What
internal,
we're doing
external,
is
flexion, extension.
right.
All of the planes are kind of happening simultaneously, but that's kind of the motion of the action.
Yeah, and if we use a mathematical analysis, we are playing within the framework of physics. So that's the science that we are playing within. But the movement can be thought of as calculus because calculus is the measurement of the rate of change. So it's all calculus and this sort of sequencing where and when at the exact appropriate position in space at the exact appropriate time, the where and the when. And that's what makes something like a rope flow so valuable because you have a feedback mechanism that's always on and it's always truthful. So if the rope is true, so are you. And now you've downloaded the muscle memory to be this fluid spiraling entity.
And if you get down deeper into the kind of a micro level or the cellular level, the connect, or just like looking at the connective tissue a little closer, something I've heard you said, and you could go this in a micro or a macro way, but I've heard you say that strength is pressure management.
Correct. That's the way I think of it. I want to just simplify it. We are hydraulic creatures with a
Yeah,
pneumatic regulation. So it's the
this is a
fluids and
very
the
big
breath.
deal, this
Yeah, and
concept.
and that's really what it is. And you could sort of one example of that is someone like Bo Jackson, who has big, strong muscles that were God given, tends to have fluidity and power and speed greater than the Brian Bosworth who built the body in the weight room. So, and it's not that weightlifting is bad. It's just that the manner in which you move mass and fight resistance or move resistance, you can do that more productively to create fluid movement, or you can sort of get bunched up and be herky jerky and less athletic. And so now, to the extent that you're performing better due to increased strength, you're eroding some of the capacity to express that strength if you don't maintain the fluidity.
And this gets into the concept like Buckminster Fuller stuff and tensegrity and kind of maintaining that, I don't know, dynamic, expansive, tensional network throughout the system, kind of just making up like word salad. But it seems like these vortex type motions, they lend themselves to more the um, what would the word I'm looking for be? Kind of like the indigenous movement function. I'm trying to, I'm word salading a little bit, but like that, the nature of our body is in these spiral motions. And if you
Yes.
can lean on that quote unquote natural movement
Yep.
patterning,
Yep.
then you can maintain the tensegrity and the structure and the volume and the spaciousness and the length. And if you go away from that and try to suddenly turn a circle into a square, i.e., turn your arcs into right angles, then the impact of that, or the translation of that, will be collapse at some level, which translates to some level of compression throughout the whole. Does
Yeah.
that sound
Like,
appropriate?
yeah, like rough edges almost, according to that square analogy.
Yeah,
And back to the strength is pressure management, right?
yeah.
I mean, if you're fluidly articulating the movement where it is the natural indigenous, like I'm going to throw that thing with no wear and tear in my body, I'm going to hit the rabbit and I'm going to eat tonight. That harmony within the body is now capitalizing on the tensegrity structure and using the gravity ground reaction, and now you're more of a conduit in the Taoist, Chinese medicine martial. The anatomy is this way, it's not this way, and they say heaven, earth, and man. And
So could you explain audibly what this way and that way is?
okay, so this way is hands up overhead, reaching up to the sky.
Yeah.
That's the Chinese or Taoist.
Oh, like the anatomical chart guy
That
with his
that's
hands
the
down the side.
anatomical position,
Right.
and what it does is it's a more accurate. You're not one step removed where you have a hitch in your thinking, because if the table is not long enough, so you put the cadaver down with the arms, palms up at your hips. Well, now is the thumb on the outside of the body or the inside of the body?
Hmm.
You sort of mentally hitch, like, okay, it's on the outside, but it's actually on the inside. When you do this arms overhead, palms facing forward, now it's like, oh yeah, the thumb is on the inside, the big toe is on the inside. And the Chinese meridians will correspond with that in terms of the yang organs and the yin organs.
Hmm.
So I don't want to confuse everybody, because this is, I mean, it might be word salad, but it's not made up.
Yeah,
It's completely made up.
go into it.
Yeah.
Go.
So the the concept that you are a conduit for this force, for the force, like Yoda and Luke Skywalker,
Yeah.
right? It's always on. Everything in your body is calibrated to that 9.8 meters per second squared. That's the where, which is straight up and down, and it's the when, 9.8 meters per second squared, and that's going to dictate your bone density. It's
That being
going to,
gravity,
yeah,
9.8 meters squared.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's the gravitational pull or speed, the acceleration due to gravity.
Yeah.
And even when you're standing still, it's happening. You got to put the ing at the end of it. So there is no such thing as static.
Right.
From an outer perspective, you have static balance and dynamic balance.
Yeah.
But
Posture is a verb.
bingo, yes, I really like that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
borrow that one.
Yeah. It's
but
yours.
but that happening is, it dictates, how you're going to calibrate your blood pressure. Everything is tuned to that frequency of the gravitational force, and the more intelligently, somatically intelligent you can deal with the force, the less pain, the better performance, the more joy, the just everything across the board improves when you are educated well physically.
Hmm.
And because so many people around us don't move so well, the mirror neurons are sort of taught at a subcortical level. Oh, I'm supposed to move like shit. Okay. And that never even crossed your intellectual mind, because you're just going to do what you're exposed to. So if there was a case in England where a little girl was raised in the backyard with the dogs and parents were alcoholics, and this little girl at the age of 11 or 12 was a dog on all fours, eating with her mouth, barking and licking and stuff like that. It was just the imprint, like the little duckling imprints on whatever, and then it's not a duck. So
Yeah.
human beings are so plastic. So that's one thing. And the modern technology, convenience, and ease reduces the burden so you don't have to move well and live your whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I can get to the fridge and get my beer, and there ain't no problem. Not yet, but there ain't no problem. So
Yeah.
most people don't even understand that there is a greater potential for this economy and the ease and the fluidity because they weren't exposed to it. They have no reference to it, and there's no need to do it in the immediate sense.
Yeah.
And so the physical therapist is really up against the wall because if somebody comes in with 37 years of experience doing something relatively poorly, and now they want to fix that, and they don't understand that the fascial sheathing, the fascial bags, as it were, that's really where a lot of the damage is done, is that habituated posture, the verb, has transformed the structure to have all sorts of adhesion and restriction. Whereas, and so, you're looking at a joint and you're sort of doing the joint, and you don't realize that, oh, if we release the sternocleidomastoid, we may have a downstream effect that, makes your knee feel better sooner.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that it's advancing, but it's harder to do because it's less like a multiple choice test where, like, oh, A is the right answer, B is the right answer, right? This is more nuanced where it's like, okay, well, it depends. Right? I remember when
Well,
I sat years ago in 2002, I sat for the CSCS test, and I took the test. I studied for it, so it was relatively easy for me. And I could see how multiple choice, like, okay, they're trying to trick me with answer B, but they want me to say answer A, but you put me on a debate stage, give me either A or B, and I'll win the debate.
right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Something like an idea of what we've learned with muscles through anatomists is that they are these individuated fibers that have specific tasks. Another perspective, kind of like a la maybe Tom Myers in Anatomy Trains, or maybe Gil Headley. He's like a cadaverist slash brawler slash very interesting
The
mind.
fuzz.
The fuzz, yeah, slash poet slash artist slash just interesting guy. I highly recommend listening to the Gil Headley episodes in the past, or Tom Myers. Um, but I think borrowing a perspective from them, I think I heard this from them. Instead of thinking of you having 640 odd individuated muscles, you could think of them as being like 640 individuated fluid sacs that
Yeah.
are all sliding among each other.
Yes.
And so that's actually this relationship of these sliding surfaces. There's 640 individuated sacs, but it's not that
It,
they're individual muscles, like their own entities. It's just separations
it's
of,
almost
of
like,
of membranes and connective tissue, and they all need to slide with each other. And the way that they slide with each other is kind of through this like multi-planar, spiral type mechanic motion. And when
yeah,
that starts to get bound up or adhesed or dehydrated or any of that, that creates almost like a scarring in that aspect of the connective tissue matrix. Now, when there's a scarring in one part, you could think of that matrix almost like a sweater. And so if you pull one part of the sweater, that's going to pull throughout the whole entire system. That pull is going to manifest itself in the hip, in the foot, in the way that you breathe, in the way that your heart beats, in the way that the motility of your organs. The whole system will have an effect from just that little bit of ripple of connective tissue manipulation at some point. And so now we start looking at the body as like, whoa, okay, so it's kind of like you're saying it's connected. It's like, yeah, we're saying it's connected. And then if you can come back to the plate of getting closer, like less entropy and getting closer to ease and connection and integration, it actually becomes a much more simpler equation. But when you're so disintegrated or individuated, it becomes really complex, the idea of how do we connect all these parts? Well, it's because you separated all of them.
yeah,
But the closer it gets back to that midline point or that integration point or unicity or whatever the hell you want to call it, if you want to get like metaphysical about it, suddenly this, you get closer to the center of the spiral and it actually gets easier. Like, oh, this was actually the easiest path all along. I know that was kind of like a convoluted mess of metaphysical stuff with actual like grounded Western anatomical jargon, but
Well,
I think that's how it works.
both sides utilized, right? And I mean, each perspective can enhance your understanding of for a greater totality. And if we go back to strength as pressure management, then the muscles are sort of these fluid capsules filling in the fascia.
Hmm.
And so it's the fluidity of it. You know, you're not nearly as strong if you're dehydrated
Right.
because the capsule has now been sucked dry, and so you can't manage as much pressure.
Huh. That's interesting. Can we continue the magical
Yeah.
journey of spiral mechanics to the body? So we came up into, so started with the foot, we got windlass effect, and we got some of that, the rotational stuff happening, kind of starting on uh, the lateral arch and moving across the transverse arch into the medial arch and the toe off and the windlass, loading the plantar fascia, creating like this tensional kind of spring back type effect, which is convenient that we have this elastic recoil built
Yes.
into all of our joints in our body. And
Yes.
if we're not moving in a way that takes advantage of that elastic recoil, then suddenly we have to muscle our way through movement.
That's a great
So,
way to put it. And what I would say is that for the person out there who wants to train their feet, I prioritize the lateral arch first. So
hmm,
I call that the first arch. And there's a big chunk of meat in between the back of the fifth metatarsal and then the calcaneus. It's a big chunk of meat. And the stronger you are there, simply as defined by I can stand on a cylindrical surface or a river rock or whatever the thing is and extend my toes and widen them such that when I stand on that, it doesn't instantly curl my toes.
hmm,
And Todd Durkin said something that was brilliant. He said, pain is weakness leaving the body. It's
hmm,
very football oriented. And it's true. So, pain, again, is pressure management. And if I can find the sweet spot, the Goldilocks pain, where I'm not thrust into defense and tension, but I'm able to sort of like, okay, I'm going to breathe through this, or I'm going to make it through this. Now change is facilitated. And that first arch, the lateral arch, will set you up in the cascade. It's like getting a good jump at the start.
hmm,
But if the lateral arch, which many people don't even consider an arch, right? You say the arch, oh, there's one arch and maybe two if there's a transverse arch, but there's another arch in the foot. Yeah, it's between your, the back of your fifth metatarsal and your calcaneus.
hmm.
So that sort of, I guess, okay, now we're moving up the body.
Yeah, and so you recommend with IU videos of this as well. And I've just naturally, intuitively done this as well because I've had some kind of like gnarly beef jerky type sensations in that area,
Yeah.
and it's felt quite relieving to
Yes.
kind of work on some of that area. So you recommend someone standing on like a barbell or something, and that tissue kind of like just right anterior or in front of the ball or whatever you call the heel of the foot.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's outside just in front of the heel.
Just in front of the heel, right?
Just in
Yeah.
front of the heel on the outside edge of the foot. That's the first arch. And a barbell would be like, okay, now you're getting into high school, like a foam roller where you're holding on to something. That would be
Right.
more kindergarten.
Yeah.
And you, most people should probably start in kindergarten
Yeah.
and then progress to high school.
Yeah.
And I, it's all about finding what I call delicious discomfort.
Mm.
So it's discomfort, but there's a delicious aspect of it because it gives you light at the end of the tunnel that this pain is going to diminish because I've tuned it to that perfect amount, the Goldilocks, right? Not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too soft. It's
Yeah.
just right.
And what a lot of people will find with that, I bet you have experience with this as well. But if people do just start doing some pressure along the feet like that, they'll find perhaps some of that low back pain that they had oftentimes will kind of dissipate a little bit. At least I've had
Oh,
that. I've had that
well,
experience.
my whole thrust into my career as an inventor began with lower back pain, which the antecedent causal factor for that was rollerblading for 6 years and not walking, barely walking ever, because I love the effortless power. I lived in Manhattan, the whole thing's paved. So I was in skates all the time. Like, and you know that I'm, if, if somebody's going to eat a pizza, I'm going to eat five, right? So, when I go to In and Out, I mean, it's a minimum of 12 patties, I mean, so,
That's good. That's
so,
good.
so that if you can't resolve the exchange through your feet, tension comes up in your body. So
Right.
if you step on a Lego, right, it's tension rises, you're suddenly uprooted. And so therefore, like any of the little imbalances or, sort of over tensed and stressed areas that are holding on for dear life to protect your spine, those things tend to get exasperated if your feet are weak. Whereas if
Mm,
your feet are strong, I
yeah.
can drop the tension. We
Yeah.
we did the breathing exercise prior to this, and on that, like as we were finishing, I could feel everything just dropping.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like by having, like, our feet are incredibly complex. They have 33, I think it's like 33 joints. They have, I think, is it 26
It
bones,
depends
32
on the
joints? Right.
sesamoids. If you're going to add the sesamoid, and then some people have like
Okay.
five sesamoids.
Yeah. Right. Anyways, they're complex,
Yeah.
and they have, I think it's, if I remember right, there's like 7,000 odd nerve endings in the bottom of the feet. There's, and, please correct me if any of that, there's a lot of sensitivity and complexity within the foot,
Yes.
regardless of the specificities of the numbers. And we've kind of dumbed them down and put them in these kind of like foot coffins, to use like Kitty Bowman language around what shoes are, and then we've like bound our feet in a way, not quite to the same degree as in Asia, but still some level of binding of the feet and an atrophying of that sensitization of the foot, that naturally its endogenous function would be to be incredibly fucking sensitive. And so there's probably something to that. And it seems like, almost like, if you reduce the amount of bandwidth or capacity to receive information from the environment from our feet, these like massively sensitive receptors, then suddenly that bandwidth that could have been distributed through there and kind of detected, it's going to probably go up into the back and the spine on all the innervations around there. And now the spine has to work double time to understand what the hell's happening with the environment, because the foot's not actually doing the job to be sensitized enough to detect what's happening.
Yeah.
Is that,
Well,
is that reasonable?
yes, absolutely. And related to that, my prescription when somebody wants to get out of sort of, the running shoe model and they want to go to a barefoot shoe, my prescription is okay, I want you to find a safe surface, right? Use the broom and clean the sidewalk or whatever it is. And I want you to walk and jog barefoot so that you can feel why it doesn't hurt to do that. And then you put on the shoe and you try to replicate it. And now you go back to the actual barefoot. And then you go back to covered in the rubber.
Hmm.
Now, I prefer bareback.
Me
Okay.
too. I
It,
find I find I find running with barefoot shoes incredibly painful. I find running barefoot very fine.
and the analogy there is bareback in the bedroom. So imagine, that everybody I guess has a preference, but if you wear a rubber, the sensation is diminished, and that's super super thin. Now put 3 or 5 millimeters of rubber that's going to prevent attack from going through it. It's
Yeah.
dead. You don't feel a damn thing. And I used to wear these shoes called soft stars, and they were
Hmm.
moccasins. And I wore those for, I don't know, 6, 8 years. And then they discontinued the model that I like, their original run amok. What are you doing? But they had a bull hide version where you're now on this really strong leather. And I
Hmm.
could tell the difference between a dime and a nickel underneath my feet with those on. And
Yep.
I was eating pho with my friend Steve Cotter, and I told him that. And he goes, "Okay, well, let's see." He puts a dime down, he puts a nickel down, and I stand on it. I'm like, "Okay, well, that's the dime. Okay, well, that's the nickel." And even with, Vivos or whatever brand you're going to do, it'd be very difficult to discern a dime versus a nickel.
Yeah.
Even harder with a dime and a penny.
Yeah.
But that sensation, there's something about the immediacy of it with those sensory nerves down there that gives you that immediate, way faster than thought.
Mm.
So that's why I like to sequence and contrast, do it barefoot and figure out why that feels good.
Yeah.
Now put the shoe on.
What is your prescription for athletes for shoes? Because I've recently, I have, probably 15 pairs of Vivo barefoot shoes, and they're a sponsor, and I think they're fantastic. I think as far as like barefoot esque shoes, I think they do a great job. They're stylish, they're all things. I also have a pair of Brooks where I don't have any sponsorship with them at all, but I find they make my feet feel good when I'm walking on just like hard, gnarly, hot pavement all day.
Mm,
And
yeah, yeah. I like
I
it.
feel like I feel like there's a time and place for barefoot shoes. I think the time and place for me personally, if I were recommending to somebody, would be when you're walking on roots and you're walking on rocks and you're walking on grass. What's great about barefoot shoes is it encourages a person to want to find natural environments, because it's probably not going to be that comfortable walking on like pavement in New York all day long. And then I find barefoot in general, I can walk on almost any surface barefoot and I feel quite fine. I think if I was like running for a while on
Yeah,
pavement, that might not be ideal, but there's something about the sensitivity of actually opening up and exposing my skin to the ground that
yeah.
suddenly it's like that pain that I may have had from barefoot shoes from walking on pavement all day suddenly isn't quite there. Although I'm not sure, because I don't know that I walk that much with that. But what is your prescription for athletes or people that just want to move more athletically for
Yeah.
footwear?
Well, the first thing I'll start with is like I appreciate and the art of compromise. So
Right.
if an NFL athlete comes into my gym and he's got, sort of running shoes on, I'm not going to be the shoe Nazi who, scolds him for wearing those shoes. We're going to ease into it. And what I would say is that I like I like your perspective, because chicken dinner, always chicken dinner, always
Hmm.
chicken dinner. Okay, well, give me some steak,
Right.
and then have a cheat and eat some pizza. So,
Yeah.
the Brooks might be the pizza, and
Yeah.
it's the world, the earth is round, but the world is flat. And that is because the wheels of commerce must roll, and the best way to do it is on pristine flat.
Yeah.
So there are some people in this world who have not walked on something not pristine flat in 10 years. Okay. Everywhere it's pristine flat, right? Go to a shopping mall, go to a fitness convention. You are on absolutely pristine flat. And that constant stimulus of the same, the same is not healthy.
Yeah.
So you want to encourage, and that's why you can do sort of the homework in terms of training your feet to be able to stand on river rocks. I I used to have like a dish at my standing desk of river rocks, and that's what I stood on. And my feet have become extremely strong. Right now, they're strong, but they're nubile in terms of callus. So I can't walk on hot, and if I run, they're going to scratch up. But just in terms of the strength of the skeleton and all the tissue in the foot, my feet are extremely strong. So I can get away with wearing my barefoot shoes on pristine flat, and I don't really need to, take the day off and wear a pair of running shoes. But if I were going to run a marathon, get me the fast Nikes, right? Like, get me something that's going to give me the cushion so that I can pound for
Yeah.
what would be an unnatural distance for most people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh, what and I would tend to encourage someone to make the transition, but I think feet take a long time and you can do damage trying to go too fast.
Mm.
So, if you start, instantly going from something cushiony and tilted forward to barefoot and really minimalist, you may get some plantar fasciitis that now puts a little, wrench into the machine there, where now you're dealing with that. And if you just went slower and you did the work on the side to strengthen the feet, and it's literally as simple as stand on something that hurts and make the pain go away. I mean, it literally is that simple. And extend your toes. So the way that you make the bottom of your foot strong is you prove it to yourself that I'm standing on this thing. There's that delicious discomfort, and there is absolutely no toe curl.
Mm,
That means that your foot is just fundamentally strong,
mm,
because now you don't need to deform. You are so strong through that foot that I can splay and extend those toes and I can stand on it. And what I would also say to anybody out there who wants to train their feet, it is more productive to roll the cylinder or something from the ball of the foot to the heel. And so if you think about like your socks or your Spider-Man suit, I believe in pulling your socks all the way on,
mm.
right? It's not to say that rolling to the toes is necessarily bad, but if you put the pressure coming from distal to proximal, you're in effect giving it that fluid wash and that fascial sort of memory that I'm pulling on my spider suit more snug, more snug. I'm taking
Yeah,
slack out of the system,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, um,
Which
my
a good way to do that is just stand barefoot on a slant board, and you can kind of feel almost like that
yeah,
fascial
yeah, right,
stop being
right,
pulled up
yes,
towards the ankle.
yes,
And then
yes,
also from like a manual therapy perspective, oftentimes if you're doing any type of physical manipulation, a suggestion would be move distal to proximal, or like away from the heart to the heart. So you're trying to move all of that fluid up towards the heart. That's
yeah.
not
That's what,
exactly what
yeah.
you're
So,
saying
so
now,
in a
but
sense,
it's kind of a
yeah,
similar type thing.
yeah. In a sense, you're taking it and you're sort of saying, all right, let's create a wave of that fluid into proximal because it's going to come
Yeah,
back out. But if
yeah.
I pull it out, now I'm sort of pooling on the distal as opposed to let's get it there and let it wash back out.
What do you think is the, and we're still not done with the following the spiral patterns of the body. We're at the sacrum, and how the kind of the sacrum and the pelvis moves in this interesting figure eight type pattern as well. But I'm curious, when did we divert as a culture from arc like movement into square box 90-degree movement, and why did we do that? If that's an accurate description of what's happened from the the movement of modern culture.
Yeah, let me think. I think that process sort of begins when you're creating that flat surface and then harnessing the technology for transportation, such as the wheel, the wagon, the
Right.
horse cart. I think that that's when it really starts. And then, if you riding a horse, they wear the cowboy boots, right? So I can kick them in because they sort of fit, and then I can notch them on, with that heel. So, and now I'm getting bow legged,
Yeah.
like I'm really bowing it out. Um, so that would be a case where just the functional reality of I can get a lot more done with the horse than without. There's
Yeah.
going to be a biomechanical cost for specializing in that.
I just had that's so interesting. At one point, when in the discovery of the wheel, essentially, suddenly we can ride on the arc technology of the wheel.
Yes.
We outsourced our arcs, our human anatomical arcs, to the efficiency of the wheel, and then we sat inside a cart at 90-degree angles
Yeah. Yeah.
while the
There you
wheel did the
go.
efficient thing.
Yeah. There you go. That's
Damn,
yeah. That's pretty good.
that's interesting.
Yeah. And I would say that, I mean, just off the top of my head, that seems like the logical or the most profound transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. What's school do to human movement, and what's how could we improve physical education for kids?
You could improve physical education by get up out of your chair and put your pencil down and actually move. So that would be a good start. And then learn the ropes. Learn the freaking ropes, and you don't got to jump through it. I mean,
Yeah.
It is, it's the Rosetta Stone. It is, you take on the quality of the tool that you train with. And if you
Yeah.
want that fluid, fast, and just like, wow, 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 just learn rope flow.
Mm.
There are so many downstream effects to it that, because if you're going to talk about the feet, it's the most logical place in the body to go next would actually be the head,
Mm.
because if you're on one foot, the fundamental position of balance for locomotion is to have that head over the foot and the coil of the core so that your center of mass still goes straight, but you've put the head over the foot and you create that fundamental spiral, which creates an overhand figure eight with the hips and an underhand figure eight with the shoulders. And so, like, I've had cases where the long jumper is having some problem with the foot, like it's pronating too early or getting collapse. And then you say, okay, well, let's learn the figure eight and let's go head over foot. And now suddenly there's no more problem with the foot because
Yeah,
by,
so this is now we're up into the spine. What is spinal engine? What is like, because people, probably the majority of people don't know what you're talking about
yeah,
when you're saying this.
right.
Like for a layman person,
Yes.
what is happening here of coiling the torso and
Yeah.
getting like
Yeah.
all these different planes of motion through it and getting your stacking your spine over the posted foot and the value of perfect balance and loading that side to release onto the next side and kind of like
Yes.
turning yourself into a natural pendulum.
Yeah.
What does that look like? How do we do that if you're just like a house
Okay.
person,
Yeah. All
householder
right.
hanging around
I got,
doing
I got
normal
a,
stuff?
I got a funny way to answer this.
Yeah.
First, the earth cooled. Then came this, right? The little amoeba protozoan structure. And God said, all right, eat or be eaten, go. And, and you're in the fluid. And now you don't have the gravitational force to contend with. You're buoyant. So what you do is you side bend. So the Piscean or fish-like movement is basically predominant side bending.
Mm.
Okay. And that they did scientific studies where if I take a sort of cartilaginous structure and I just side bend it a lot, it'll actually node itself into little harder segments, softer segments, harder segments, softer segments, because that's more efficient. So nature will find that efficiency. And so that now you have the vertebrae. And now if you're going to come out of the water, suddenly you have the burden of gravity. And it's very inefficient to brace your core and like prop yourself up and then just do it like this. Whereas
Yeah.
if I'm here and I'm amphibious and the limbs are coming out wide and sideways, all I got to do is just bend my spine like a fish and boom. Oh, but I need the clearance, so I need to create a three-dimensional figure eight action to make that progress with no energy at all,
Yeah.
right? And so, boom, I just made progress. Well, now I'm going to do it that way. Just made progress, just made progress. And so, the mammalian strategy is create more potential energy with the sagittalization of the limb. So the amphibian reptile is more this, and that's a paleo diet. You sit on a rock and heat by the sun, and you can wait a month before you have to eat again because you don't have a metabolism
Mm.
like the mammal. But now the
What is what
mammal,
is what is sagittalization of the limb mean? I mean, I
that
know what it
means
means.
that
What?
means that rather than the limb coming out on the sides of the body, they come and they spiral under the body. So it's more like of a
Mm.
push up. In the top position of a narrow push up is the way that a dog or a cat or a horse, that's the way they're organized. And
Mm.
so suddenly the center of mass has all this gravitational potential that the amphibian and the reptile don't have. So they lay on their belly and they got to go sort of up to move, whereas the horse or the cat, they're already propped up, and so they sort of go down to move.
Mm.
So, and there's a metabolic cost to propping yourself up.
Mm.
And then as soon as the organism finds this vertical, like we did, maybe it's a tree or something that now there's something about that craniosacral relationship and the polarization of, the fluid of that, in the cerebral spinal fluids, you have this polarity that I think gets you closer to God and, just in terms of getting to the word. right?
Hmm.
You
Interesting.
become human. You become like a creator because of this like dramatic polarity. And then 8 hours you lie down and have it horizontal where it can just flush itself back and forth, wash itself, and sort of purify from the waste products. Um, to recover and then come back at it and play the game with greater efficiency
Hmm.
because now you're not propping on four, which is more powerful and has certain advantages. The organs aren't compressing because they're sort of hanging down, draping down from the torso. But we are the most efficient mammal when it comes to bipedal locomotion versus quadruped locomotion or
Hmm.
kangaroo locomotion where you're jumping. So
Yeah.
we can run anything down, right? If you got a
Yeah.
group and you can communicate, and you know how to read a footprint, well, you're gonna catch whatever you're chasing,
Yeah,
right?
I've heard. I've heard. I need like a young Jamie here to Google stuff. I've heard something that of an association of our neurological or cognitive evolution with bipedalism,
Yeah,
and whether it's like chicken or the egg.
yeah,
I'm not sure. I think it's up for debate. But
right.
there's something, and that's an interesting thing that humans, the most like cognitively evolved organisms or species or creatures happen to be the most proficient bipedal
Well, you know what?
species, which is kind of
You,
interesting. I
you
wonder
know
if
what
there's
I?
something there.
Okay, so what I think is if you're gonna go vertical, the bridge to vertical is some external mechanism, right? So first you're gonna use something to maintain the balance, right? And so perhaps that spawns sort of the beginning of tool usage for locomotion,
Mm,
right? So the tree or whatever, if I get down, I need a stick because otherwise I'm going to get eaten. So I think the stick is the fundamental first tool. And when you're old, you you literally have a third leg in the form of a stick.
mm,
And so now you're associating with this tool, and now you're spawning a certain amount of creativity to say, what else can I do with this thing to leverage my capacity to
right.
get things done?
Mm,
And so maybe that creates like a feed forward, and
mm,
you know, it's sort of like, okay, if I go 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 32, 64, 128. Oh, wow. Right.
yeah,
Google,
that's
Googleplex.
interesting. There's
So,
also there's also something. There's the Dr. Roger Sperry, who won the Nobel Prize for the split brain theory.
yeah.
A quote from him that's interesting that kind of ties into all this stuff is 90% of the stimulation and nutrition to the brain is generated by the movement of the spine. 90% of the stimulation and nutrition to the brain is generated by the movement of the spine. So I wonder what happens when we become more static in our spinal motion. And something that you have beef with, I know, is the Palloff press. Uh, so it feels to me like a more evolved, intelligent version of a human being would be one that can incorporate this kind of like figure eight arc like movement throughout the spine. And it seems like it would be
Yes.
also very supportive for neurological function based
Yeah.
off of Roger Sperry's
Right.
quote. At least it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, the Palloff press is a de-evolution. Okay, because nobody did that a long time ago.
What
It's
is the Palloff press?
Palloff press is you're standing flat, meaning your feet are even, and your heels are on the ground, and you have a perfectly transverse force. So you're standing 90 degrees perpendicular to the cable or the elastic
Yeah.
band. You're holding the band palms facing each other, thumbs up, and then you press your arms out to create a mechanical disadvantage in terms of your ability to resist that force. And it puts you, what it does is it fundamentally uproots the body, and it causes you to have to now move before you can move. And uprooting is terrible. You never want to be uprooted.
Mm,
There's no value in being uprooted. I mean, the only value in being uprooted is to get off the Lego for like a split second, right? Like that would be a case where the tension is going to rise naturally, but there's no other circumstance where that's useful. And it puts you in an extremely weak position.
Mm.
Like when you hit a baseball, it's the pinkies coming through, right? It's not the back of your palm. Then you're an arm swinger if you don't
Mm.
spiral the hands.
Interesting.
Can't throw with it. And what happened, and this is what happened, and eventually, and I think there's a momentum building that everybody's going to realize how stupid the Palloff press was, because I just think you'll be out of business if you prescribe it at some point in the not too distant future, right? So what happened was influencers who have PhDs, published peer review, expert in the field of the spine, blah, 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 they conflated heavy weightlifting, axial load, squat, deadlift with moving and shifting your weight.
Mm.
So the core doesn't generate power. That's what they said. All right. The core doesn't generate power. I said that to a therapist who was working on my father last night. And my father doesn't know any of this stuff. He goes, your core doesn't generate power. What the hell are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like a layman who's not in the industry. It's just like, it doesn't make sense. What do you mean your core doesn't generate power? If your task is to sort of lift the weight, well, then it's more of a pressure structure to transmit the force to the ball and socket joint so you can do your squat or your deadlift, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. Right? I'm not the functional guy who says forget about strength. I
Yeah.
think they're ridiculous. And it's almost every one of them practically. So the Palloff press is teaching the nervous system to perfect the art of freeze, where you have to move in order to move. And at game speed, real life speed, you can't afford to have to move before you can move. Right? I mean, now you're a step behind, you lose.
Mm.
And if you're going to do that and get really strong at it because you associate effort with value, which a lot of people do, now what happens? Why are there so many non-contact injuries where you got this great athlete just running, nothing happens, and they blow out their knee and have to get a surgery? They end their career. They don't get the scholarship. Dreams are crushed. Lives are destroyed. You see, I'm just laying it on these guys,
Yeah.
right? Because that's my hypothesis. And now, tell me a better story, right? Okay,
Yeah.
what's your hypothesis? Why am I wrong, right? And none of them do it. Because then it's just, oh, he's crazy. He invented that piece of shit BOSU ball. So it becomes an attack, right? Seriously, I'm just saying. Anybody out there listen, I'm just saying what's so. Jersey just is, all right? That's it, right? And
Would you
go ahead.
would you have equal beef with the Palloff press if it was perhaps, say you were in a lunge position holding a band or a cable or something like that, and your spine was stacked over your planted foot, like front facing foot, and you were like spine over foot and head over foot, and you were holding and kind of exploring like quote unquote dynamic trunk stability through that range? Would you still have beef with the
Okay,
Palloff press from that position?
I would have less beef, but I would also be like, well, why are we not doing it optimally?
Yeah,
Why are
right.
we not
Why are
why
we
are we not
practicing?
training the end range of rotation and getting
Right.
ourselves into a fundamentally strong position of strength that
Yeah.
I can go to and get to?
Yeah, I get
Like
that.
why are we stuck in the middle? Like why are we doing it? And if you're doing it, why are you still doing it? Like, okay, you cross the river, you know how to do that. Now go get strong for real, where it's going to carry over to moving strong,
Yeah.
right? It's this clinical nonsense, and I don't know. I think that a lot of people who want to climb high in the scientific realm of exercise, they weren't the best player on the team, right? And they, maybe they were bullied physically, so now it's their turn to bully people intellectually. And your fear of being ostracized by intellectual bullies starts to pile on. And you're looking inside the circle, and you're not allowed to look outside the circle because inside the circle is science and outside is anecdote.
Yeah.
right? So they basically put themselves up against a wall.
Well,
And
anecdote's the front of the spear of science.
listen,
Is
art and
is the thing?
science. Okay,
Yeah,
art
like
and science,
they're
right?
both. Yeah,
Well, what
they're
they
both
do,
equally valuable.
well, what there is a scientific process to art, the Fibonacci spiral. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that is sciency, that is what art is. That's why
Mm.
it's beautiful. That's why it's moving. It's because
Yeah,
it
it's all math.
taps into some physical reality that just is, right? And I think that science, from an exercise specialist perspective, becomes religion.
Yeah.
It's right. You can't challenge it. What do you mean you can't challenge it? Isn't the whole point of science is that you're supposed to challenge it? Why are
Well,
you afraid of putting your little thing into the crucible? Because it's going to
that's
burn up?
that's like I think Charles Poliquin. I think he said something like, if you're going to just trust what the science is saying, then you're always going to be 10 years behind.
Yeah,
And
yes,
if
right,
you're just following medical textbooks, then you're going to be like 20
right,
years behind.
right,
And so
right.
it's like
And
science is perpetually catching up with anecdote. Science is
yes,
perpetually catching up with artistic expression.
well, and
And it's
here's
like, oh, there's something there. Okay, well, let's run some trials. Let's try to clear all the variables as much as we can, sterilize this thing as much as humanly possible,
yeah.
and create some quantitative value for this. And now we're going to start to worship that.
Well,
And it's
and
like
what
that's valuable, but it's not 100% of the like the animated human experience.
right, and what I would say is that the first process in the scientific process is don't wait until you set up the study and do everything right. Test it now with yourself,
Right.
right? Figure out how to do no harm in the testing, and then test, with an empirical measure. Can you run faster if you do this? Okay, figure out what's worth studying.
Hmm.
The world's foremost expert on the subject of locomotion, according to the peer-reviewed pretenders, will tell you that at top speed, the time it takes to reposition the limbs in the air is the same for a little old lady, for Usain Bolt. What? The problem is he only studies on a treadmill. Top
Right.
speed for the little old lady's 4 miles an hour, and Usain Bolt's running 27 miles an hour. And then you put it frame by frame, man, now analyzing it, and there's a similar time frame in the cycle.
Mm.
Now put them on the ground and watch them. I mean,
Mm.
what are you kidding me? I mean, my father would be like, no, the fast kid moves his feet faster. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? And the biomechanical position of the landing is important, because if I'm landing on one foot and I'm crossing the knee at that landing, I'm fast. But if
Mm.
I'm landing on the foot and the other foot's way behind, I'm slow.
Yeah.
Front side mechanic, back side mechanic. So
Mm.
it's it's literally this weird form of worship from the underlings, to the ones who have that position of, oh, I have the scientific authority. I have 200 peer-reviewed articles. Like, I am the master.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're not. Emperor doesn't wear clothes, and I'm the little boy. What I like is I have an expression: who said what when? Because I can't believe that the opportunity and the slot was even open, that I could be the guy who says, look, it's head over foot. It's so simple.
Yeah.
Just put your head over your foot. And who said that? You
And
see what I'm saying?
the head over the foot is like a very easy for folks that are kind of like not deeply steeped in all of this, is pretty very simple. It's just if you're standing bipedal, stand up on one foot. If your spine stays in the middle, you're going to fall inward.
Yes,
So
yes,
you're just going to
yes.
naturally organically place your weight being like the center of mass, your torso, i.e. your spine and your head, over top of the foot that
Well,
is now
and
planted.
and that's
And
why.
that times walking, you'll
Yeah,
naturally kind of create this back and forth movement. And in order to allow that back and forth movement to happen, it's going to be a bunch of little micro spirals throughout your feet and tibias and femurs and pelvis and sacrum and spinal segments and the whole thing. And it
and
just you become this like little screwdriver piston thing
yeah,
that just rotates back and forth.
and the simple strategy will take care of all the idiosyncrasies that you uniquely have.
Yeah.
Like, if I can take a snapshot and you could sustain that position, well, now you're fundamentally balanced. And
Yeah.
the reason it's head over foot is because it is that serpentine movement. if we're bipedal going straight, we want the center of mass to go straight. We don't want to be like zigzagging the center of mass because that's not efficient. So
Yeah.
if you just think, all right, I'm going to go my head to my foot, I'm going to my head to my foot. When I get there, I am there, right? I mean, there it is, and now you're Dantian below the
Yeah.
navel. That stays in the same position.
Right. Yeah,
So
it's that spiral motion that allows the
yes,
spine to be tracking
yes,
forward.
and so back to sort of like the spinal engine. Serge Grakovetsky, who was the guy was a scientist. He wasn't an anatomist or a biomechanics guy. The guy was like a nuclear physicist, and then he became an electrical engineer. And he just looked at the human body and the spine. He's like, okay, the curvature in the spine, this lordotic, kyphotic, sort of curvature. When you have that structure, just a simple side bend will create a torsional reality.
Yeah.
So if you don't get in your own way because somebody told you to break that anti-core is the first priority.
Torsional being rotation.
Torsional being rotation
And
and count.
when you side bend to one direction, you're going to rotate to the opposite direction.
When
Is that
here's what
right?
happens, the top and the bottom will relate in the sense that if I side bend to one way, the structure of the human spine will bring the shoulder down and back and the hip up and forward,
Yeah.
ipsilaterally, same side. And that creates this figure eight where I'm getting lift, economical lift of the side I'm bending to of that hip. So now my foot is coming higher without even lifting my foot higher. All
Mm.
right. I'm getting more stride length, and I'm going at the same time and I'm landing balanced. And then
Yeah.
the shoulder will dip down and back, and the pattern is this alternating figure eights. And so the object in motion will tend to stay in motion. A lot of these people think of rotation as like, okay, I go and I stop, and I go and I stop, and okay, I train golfers, so therefore, oh, I got to plug my laptop in.
We got to wrap up. We got to wrap up in a jiff anyway.
Okay, here we go.
I'm gonna go do some contralateral spiral mechanic stuff at a
Yeah, some
boxing class at
boxing.
10th Planet.
But
Which, by the way, I found doing rope flow stuff. I told you in the beginning, I found rope flow stuff to be very helpful with my boxing, which is interesting and just makes complete sense because you're
well,
working on all of this rotational pattern stuff and sequencing the shoulder girdle to the spine to the hips, and you're just doing that back and forth, and then you're incorporating these different planes of motion. You're walking forward with the rope, then you're going turning to the side, then you're turning
yes,
backwards.
yes.
It's very, very
And it's
helpful.
integrated with the hands, the
Yeah, right,
spiral of
exactly.
the hands. Like again, if I spiral on an uppercut and I spiral on a cross, I'm
Yeah,
traveling more distance internally. So my power goes up.
yeah,
And because it's in accord with the way the body's built, you're landing with greater power. You're moving with greater speed. You're not putting wear and tear on the joints.
yeah.
So it makes sense 8 ways to Sunday. Like
I
there's
want to ask. I want to ask. I'm curious. I ask a lot of people this question. I'd be curious your perspective from your experience and perspective. What is pain? What does
oh
pain mean to you? What is
oh
pain?
well, pain is vital information that you better do something different right now. I
Mm,
mean, the world's tallest man, I think he died because like he couldn't feel his feet, and then he got an infection in his feet, so he didn't have pain, so he doesn't know there's a problem.
mm,
Like imagine if you didn't get pain when you put your hand in a fire.
yeah,
I mean, you literally burn up. So I think pain is it's a protective mechanism that you need to change what you're doing to get out of pain. And then there is a psychosomatic aspect of pain. John Sarno and his whole approach to back pain was look, it's all in your head, right?
mm,
So there, and you can habituate pain, and there's a muscle memory with pain, and then there's phantom limb. So I mean, it's a complex thing, but I think fundamentally, pain is useful information for self preservation.
yeah. It's a request for change, or something I've heard
Yeah, I would
somebody
say
say.
that that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, yeah. Pain's interesting. I had Dr. Lorimer Mosley on recently, and he's like the world's leading expert on the what was it called? The
Nocioception.
biopsychosocial model of pain.
Okay, yeah.
which is kind of interesting how like culture and our psychology and
Well,
worldviews and all of that inform the way that we actually feel.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that, like in the heat of battle in a football field or something, like I can hit somebody and there should be pain, but there's not because
Yeah.
that psychosocial, like right now, baby, I'm amped up. Like I don't
Yeah.
feel that, right? You know, you and me get in a fight, and I ain't gonna feel pain. And if I do, I ain't gonna show it to you. Remember we were banging arms?
I know people have to check out that we'll do once this episode comes out. We'll do some social media content, YouTube videos, and stuff like
You
that.
are a tough MFer.
Thank you.
You are a. We had so much fun.
I appreciate that. Well, a lot of the toughness that I have is a product of learning movement efficiency, which I'm still wildly inefficient, broadly speaking. But compared to what I've been, I'm more efficient than I was, and a lot of your stuff has been really supportive in making me a better mover. So I really appreciate you.
Yeah, well, thank you, and listen. My athletic inadequacy was my superpower because it gave me the motivation because I'm so competitive. So
Yeah.
how can I possibly beat the better man?
Yeah.
If I don't figure out a different trick than what he's doing, I will lose if we do the same thing.
Yeah, move smarter, not harder.
Yeah, and like, if we were just to compare our genetic, who we are, you're a better man. I mean, the only thing that I could have a chance at being better than you is coordination. You're stronger than me. You're faster than me. You're bigger than me, right? That's just the way God made you.
A lot
right?
of compensation.
What's that?
A lot of compensation on my part.
No, but it's a lot of genetics. What are you, 6'2", 3"?
I'm almost 6'5". It's like awkward.
Jesus, okay, right. You see what I mean? Make me feel worse.
Yeah.
So
well,
that was an economy. I am fundamentally lazy, so lazy that I will work to the bone so I can afford to be lazy.
Yeah. Right. Well, I appreciate you, man. If people want to learn more about your stuff? I know you have free information around how to use a rope, which I think
Yes.
is like, it might sound obscure to some people, but I would just check it out. It looks cool as well. It's a fun thing to learn. It's a really great thing if you have any interest in preventing cognitive decline. Be one of the best things you can possibly do, I think, is learn how to just move a rope around, learn how to dance, learn how some of these fundamental movement patterns is one of the most important investments, free investments any person could possibly make on themselves. I would stand behind that statement.
Yeah.
So how do people, I think you provide so much value for folks. How can people learn more?
WeckMethod.com. We have a free ropes course. We have a free elastic bands course. And those are the two courses to start with. Cool. The ropes and the elastic bands. So the ropes will give you the rotational movement training, that timing coordination. And then the elastic bands, the Limit Force Elastic course, that's going to teach you the coiling core. Right. And that ability to optimize one side, the fullest range of rotation to the fundamental positions of strength and length. And we do it on one side, we do it on the other side, and you catch everything in the middle by proxy.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation again.
Yeah, right. Well, I think
we have many more to come.
Yeah, there you go. That's what we're gonna do. And if you're in San Diego, you're getting your butt in here.
I'm coming in.
We just got an MMA cage.
I know. I saw that. All right, cool. Well, I appreciate you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. That is it. That's all. See you next week. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Once again, check us out over at the Align Podcast YouTube page, as well as the Instagram, to see the instructional content that we did with the great David Weck. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for doing you. I'll see you next week.